In March, a barrel of Brent crude was racing towards $120, 2,000 ships sat trapped in the Persian Gulf, and the world's busiest oil artery was officially declared closed. Now, just weeks later, the United States and Iran say they have a deal to end their war. On the 14th of June 2026, President Donald Trump announced a ceasefire agreement with Tehran, and within hours Iran's deputy foreign minister confirmed it. After nearly 4 months of fighting, both sides have declared an immediate and permanent end to military operations. But what actually triggered this conflict? What does the agreement really contain, and is the Middle East genuinely calmer today, the 15th of June, or simply holding its breath? In the next few minutes we'll break down exactly how we got here and what comes next. This crisis did not appear overnight. Back in April 2025, Iran and the United States began a series of negotiations aimed at a new nuclear agreement, sparked by a letter from President Trump to Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Parallel talks ran between Iran and the European powers through 2025. For months, diplomats shuttled between capitals trying to revive what the original 2015 nuclear deal once promised, restrictions on enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief. But the gap never closed. Tehran kept enriching uranium well beyond civilian needs, while Washington and Israel grew convinced that Iran was edging towards weapons capability. Diplomacy stalled, mistrust deepened, and the window for a peaceful settlement narrowed through the winter. By early 2026, the diplomatic track had effectively collapsed, setting the stage for direct military confrontation. On the 28th of February 2026, the United States and Israel launched large-scale strikes on Iran, marking the start of what is now called the 2026 Iran War. The primary targets were the crown jewels of Iran's nuclear program, the deeply buried enrichment plant at Fordow, the sprawling Natanz facility, and the conversion site at Isfahan. American officials claimed all 3 sites suffered extremely severe damage, asserting that Iran's nuclear program had been set back by roughly 2 years. Iran disputed the scale of the destruction and vowed retaliation. The strikes represented a dramatic escalation, crossing a line that successive administrations had threatened but never taken. Whatever the true extent of the damage, the attacks transformed a stalled negotiation into an open regional war almost overnight, and Iran's response would soon ripple far beyond its borders. Iran's most powerful card was geography. Beginning on the 4th of March 2026, Iranian forces declared the Strait of Hormuz closed. This narrow channel between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula carries around 20% of the world's oil trade every single day. The United Kingdom's Maritime Trade Operations Center reported 10 attacks on shipping within the first few days alone. By the 21st of April, the International Maritime Organization said roughly 20,000 mariners and 2,000 ships were stranded inside the Persian Gulf, unable to move safely. Attacks also hit energy infrastructure inside Iran and across several Gulf Cooperation Council states. Analysts described it as the largest geopolitical oil supply disruption in history, larger in scale than the shocks of the 1970s. The economic consequences were felt almost instantly, thousands of miles from the fighting. The price reaction was brutal. Brent crude jumped from around $72 a barrel on the 27th of February to nearly $120 at its peak, a surge of more than 55%. Petrol stations rationed supplies, airlines cancelled routes, and a genuine fuel crisis took hold across parts of the world heavily dependent on Gulf energy. The Dallas Federal Reserve published research warning of a fresh inflation spike driven directly by the war. Households that had only just escaped the previous cost of living squeeze suddenly faced rising prices at the pump and in the shops. Then, as ceasefire rumors spread in late May, the market reversed sharply, with oil tumbling around 20% from its 2026 highs. That price swing tells you just how much the global economy was riding on a single diplomatic breakthrough. The turning point came over the weekend of the 13th and 14th of June 2026. President Trump announced that a ceasefire deal had been agreed and ordered an immediate stop to the United States naval blockade of Iranian ports. Iran's deputy foreign minister, Kazem Garibabadi, confirmed the agreement on the Sunday. Crucially, both sides declared the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, explicitly including Lebanon, where the conflict had threatened to drag in Hezbollah and reignite a wider war. Trump also stated that the Strait of Hormuz would reopen on signing, with toll-free shipping resuming. After nearly 4 months of bloodshed and economic chaos, the guns were meant to fall silent. The announcement landed just as G7 leaders were gathering for their summit, dominating the agenda of the world's most powerful economies. No deal of this magnitude happens without intermediaries, and this one had several. Pakistan's Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, revealed that Islamabad had served as a mediator between Washington and Tehran, a striking role for a country that borders Iran and maintains ties with both sides. The formal signing ceremony has been scheduled for Friday the 19th of June in Switzerland, long a neutral venue for sensitive diplomacy. Organizers say the full text of the Memorandum of Understanding between the two countries will be released publicly, a notable commitment to transparency given how secretive the negotiations had been. European governments quickly welcomed the breakthrough, and the European powers signaled readiness to move on sanctions relief, while urging that the Strait of Hormuz reopen without delay so that stranded ships and global oil flows could finally return to normal. So what does the deal contain? At its core, this is a framework rather than a finished treaty. The agreement ends the United States blockade of Iranian ports, reopens the Strait of Hormuz, and crucially opens a 60-day window of fresh nuclear negotiations. According to draft details published by Iranian media, though not independently verified, the framework would release around $24 billion in frozen Iranian assets during those 60 days as a confidence-building measure. The longer-term goal is a final agreement covering Iran's nuclear program alongside the lifting of United States primary and secondary sanctions, as well as related United Nations Security Council and International Atomic Energy Agency restrictions. In return, the leaders said they are prepared to lift relevant sanctions in response to clear, verifiable steps by Iran. In short, money and trade flow in exchange for verifiable nuclear limits. The hardest issue is the one that started it all: Iran's enriched uranium. Tehran is reported to hold around 440 kilograms of uranium enriched up to 60% purity. That matters enormously, because 60% is only a short technical step from the 90% enrichment level required for a nuclear weapon. Deciding what happens to that stockpile, whether it is diluted, exported, or placed under strict international monitoring, is among the very first items on the 60-day negotiating table. Under the reported framework, Iran would reaffirm its commitment under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty not to pursue nuclear weapons. But commitments on paper have collapsed before, and verifying them on the ground, especially at damaged sites like Fordow, will be enormously complex. This is where the entire deal could ultimately succeed or fall apart. Step back, and the wider Middle East today looks profoundly altered. The explicit inclusion of Lebanon in the ceasefire suggests an attempt to freeze the entire web of conflict, not just the direct US-Iran fighting. Israel, which co-launched the opening strikes, now has to absorb a deal negotiated largely between Washington and Tehran. The Gulf states, several of whom saw their own energy infrastructure attacked, have a powerful incentive to keep the peace and reopen shipping lanes that feed their economies. Yet the region remains heavily militarized, mistrust runs deep, and the proxy networks that have shaped Middle Eastern conflict for decades have not disappeared. A ceasefire on the 15th of June is not the same as a lasting settlement. The coming 60 days will reveal whether this is a genuine reset or merely a pause between rounds. Not everyone is convinced. Former senior American negotiator Wendy Sherman, who helped craft the original 2015 deal, has warned publicly that 60 days is simply not enough time to resolve something as technical and contentious as Iran's nuclear program. Remember, too, that the headline financial details come from a draft that neither government has officially confirmed, so the precise terms could still shift before Friday's signing. History offers a cautionary tale. The 2015 nuclear agreement was painstakingly negotiated and then abandoned years later, helping set off the very chain of events that led to this war. A framework signed under the pressure of a fuel crisis and surging oil prices may prove more durable, or it may buckle the moment the immediate economic pain eases. Verification, sanction sequencing, and political will on both sides will decide which. So here is the bottom line. As of today, the 15th of June 2026, the United States and Iran have stepped back from a war that killed the diplomatic process, closed the Strait of Hormuz, and sent oil soaring past $120 a barrel. The ceasefire is real, the blockade is lifting, and 60 days of nuclear talks are about to begin in Switzerland. But this is a beginning, not an ending. The fate of 440 kilograms of near-weapons-grade uranium, $24 billion in frozen assets, and a deeply scarred region all hang on negotiations that have barely started. Watch the Friday signing on the 19th of June, watch the oil markets, and watch whether those 60 days produce a treaty or another collapse. The Middle East has paused, but its future is still being written.